Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you are new here, and today I'm talking about all of the books I read in March. Now in March I actually had 2 vlogs go up, so I will not be talking about those books in this video. Those vlogs are kind of a February reading vlog that kind of went into the beginning of March, and the second vlog was the trans rights readathon vlog, which I just posted. So I would highly recommend you check out those 2 videos if you want to hear all my thoughts and feelings on all of those books. So today we are focusing on the 9 books that I haven't talked about yet in any videos. Normally I go by genre. I talk about different genre books because I read such a variety of genres, but I read 1 romance and 8 fantasy books. So there was not a lot of variety of genre this month. The 1 romance book I read was Digging Up Love by Chandra Bloomberg, and this is about Quentin, who is a paleontologist, and Alicia, who is an amateur baker who has a fairly large Instagram following and has dreams of opening her own bakery in Chicago, but she is stuck in her small town helping her elderly grandfather run his barbecue restaurant. And one day Alicia's grandfather is working on digging a pool in their backyard, and they discover dinosaur bones in rural Illinois, and this is a very big deal. Quentin travels to Alicia's rural town and the 2 meet and sparks fly. Big sigh on this one. This was actually a 2.5 out of 5 stars for me. I thought this was just okay in a lot of ways. I actually really liked the writing in here. This is very quippy and fast-paced. However, I really did not like the repetitive nature of the conflict. The conflict for Alicia was her wanting to express her desires and wants to her grandparents, and over and over feeling fear about expressing her truth and what she really wants out of life to her grandparents. And Quentin tries to help her so much through that, and every time Alicia lashes back at him and they end up fighting about it. Normally I understand that human emotion, however it was so repetitive, it happened over and over throughout the text, which I didn't appreciate. I am not the biggest fan of how hesitant both of the characters were to start a relationship. I want to see a couple that is head over heels in love with each other, or like infatuated with each other at the beginning and just really want to be together despite all the odds. And these 2 were they tiptoed around each other a little too much for my personal taste. This also had more to do with the paleontology and the dinosaur bone aspect of the story than it did the baking aspect, and I was kind of hoping for a baking romance. Honestly, I appreciated and liked Quentin more as a character than Alicia, and I think these 2 are not meant to be together, to be honest. I think Quentin deserves more. I did not love this. This is a 2.5 stars, and I think, sadly, I'll be getting rid of my copy at some point. Next, we're going to talk fantasy, and the lowest rated fantasy I have is actually Black Water Sister by Zen Cho. And unfortunately, this really just missed the mark. This was my book club read for my siblings this quarter, and none of us really liked this. Overall, we all thought this was rather boring. This is about Jess, who is a queer Malaysian woman who is moving back to Malaysia from America with her parents since they're kind of bankrupt, kind of broke. And Jess is also haunted by the spirit of her grandmother. The premise sounds really interesting and had a lot of promise, but overall the execution takes a turn that none of us particularly liked. This ends up being more of a crime novel that has to do with gangs and violence and maneuvering than it did with either fantasy or a queer coming of age story. Jess was a really frustrating main character. Again, it was a little repetitive in Jess's internal monologue over and over again, the same types of conflicts within her head. And overall, this just didn't go far enough in one direction. I think this book was trying to be too many things. It's trying to be a crime novel, it's trying to be a mystery novel, it's trying to be an urban fantasy, it was trying to be a queer coming of age story, and it didn't lean into any of those elements particularly well. If it had gone whole hog into one or two of those themes, I think this could have been a little bit more successful for my personal reading taste. Overall, this is a 2-star read. Unfortunately, I did not love this one. Luckily for me, every single other book I'm going to be talking about, I really liked. The next book I'm going to be talking about is the sequel to The Helm of Midnight by Marina Lostetter, which is The Cage of Dark Hours. Now, this is a horror fantasy series following a cast of characters. In the first book, we're following a detective trying to uncover a crime that has been committed. In this world, masks can be imbued with the essence of a person after they've passed away, and the mask with an essence of a serial killer was stolen at the beginning of the first book. And so we are following the detective on the case. We're following the perspective of the serial killer in the past, and we're also following a mysterious woman who seems to have magical abilities that are kind of unexplained. Now that's the first book, and this is the sequel. I don't want to get into it too much, but the world really blows up at the end of book 1, and book 2 is really dealing with those consequences. I will say I love when authors give kind of a synopsis of their own work when there has been a long time between books. I really appreciate this. So this author did a really good job giving us a plot summary of book 1 in the beginning of book 2 to help guide the readers to say, hey, remember what happened, and I really appreciated that. There are lots of queer characters in this book and in this series, and characters that not only use they, them pronouns, but neo pronouns as well. There is hinted that this might turn polyamorous, which stay tuned. Hopefully book 3 goes there, but we'll see. The main character of Corona, who is the detective, we get her perspective in both book 1 and going into book 2. She's kind of like the main character. She's not my favorite main character, but I enjoyed the other points of view that were added in book 2 enough to keep me reading. Unfortunately, this doesn't have the same horror elements. There's one scene that's kind of bloody and horrific, but the whole vibe of the book is not horror. You don't have that sense of dread reading it, if that makes sense. Overall, I did really like this sequel. I'm giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It definitely is setting a lot up for the third book and kind of reeling from the consequences of book 1, but we lose a little bit of something with the horror elements kind of fading away from book 1, which is why I liked book 1 so much. But 3.5, I still enjoyed my time reading this one. Next, we're talking The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. This was stupendous. This is a 4.75, and I'll explain why I can't give it a full 5 stars later. But this was an excellent political fantasy. I love political fantasy, and that's all this is. This is about our main character, Maya, who is a half-goblin, and he is very distantly connected to the throne of this empire. And at the beginning of the novel, we find out that the emperor and all of the heirs have died in a dirigible accident, and so Maya becomes the emperor right away at the beginning of the book. So that trope where a character who is unprepared to take on the mantle of power, to me, is called the unprepared royal, and that is one of my favorite tropes of all time, and this does an excellent job. Maya really gets in there right away and is trying to find his footing from the beginning, and he's a little naive, but he's doing his best. I want to give a trigger warning. There is an on-page suicide that happens later on in the book, and we do see that happen on page, so be careful. This was simply politics and very little plot beyond the main character trying to grapple with their power and kind of stabilize the empire after the dirigible accident. I love this. I'm giving this a 4.75 out of 5 stars. The reason I'm taking off a 0.25 stars is because there's a line in here that I really didn't appreciate. This has to do with a side character named Thara Kelleher, and he is kind of an investigator, and he is revealing to Maya that he is a queer man. Maya has this internal thought with that being unnatural, which I really didn't like, and I didn't think that that was necessary. I will say I did continue on with the spin-off series, which is following Thara Kelleher, and we are exploring a queer relationship with him in a much more positive way in that series. Take that with a grain of salt. Speaking of the spin-off series, the first 2 books of this series are out and I read them back to back. That is The Witness for the Dead and The Grief of Stones, and we're following Thara Kelleher as he is investigating crimes, essentially. I didn't love them as much as The Goblin Emperor, but I still had a really good time reading these and gave them both 4 stars. I'm really excited for the 3rd book in this series. We are following Thara Kelleher, and he is kind of flirting with a man the whole time, so I'm really hoping that in the 3rd or the final installment, we finally get to see them get together. It is very slow burn, but these are a good time, a good fantasy mystery. Next, I'm going to talk about A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Haro. This is a tiny novella about our main character, Zinnia, who is chronically and unfortunately terminally ill, and she is obsessed with the Sleeping Beauty myth. And one day she gets sucked into a fairy tale version of Sleeping Beauty, and she's trying to make her way home and help the Sleeping Beauty character within that world. I thought this was nice. This really spun the Sleeping Beauty myth on its head. I really liked the chronic illness representation in here. Zinnia is not healed in the end. She will eventually probably succumb to her terminal illness, but she does kind of reconcile with that in the end, and she's not magically healed. I really appreciated this one, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, we're talking The Adventures of Amina El-Sarafi by Shannon Chakraborty. Now, Shannon Chakraborty is S.A. Chakraborty, the author of The City of Brass, and I'm still planning on continuing that series, but I had to read her newest release. Now, this was excellent, phenomenal, 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a great adventure piracy story. This is about our retired captain, Amina El-Sarafi. She now has a daughter, and she's been living a quiet life with her family after her seafaring days, and one day a woman approaches her asking for help, and Amina decides to take on one last mission because the reward is just too good and could set up her family for the future. This has a really excellent framing narrative where we have Amina telling us her story. She is telling a chronicler her story. So we have both the chronicler, the person writing it down, having little inserts, as well as Amina, as she's telling the story, inserting herself into her own narrative, as well as the story itself, which I thought was an excellent way to do this type of tale. So many rumors surrounding this almost mythological level character, and she's kind of here to set the record straight, and I really liked that framing narrative. The villain, I will say, is a little mustache twirly, a little two-dimensional. However, he was really easy to hate and really easy to root for our main characters to overcome and defeat him. I really loved the trans representation in this story and the trans journey that one of the side characters goes on. I don't want to give it away because it is beautiful when this character kind of comes out and expresses themselves, and so I don't want to take that away from anyone, but this does have a really nice trans narrative. And Amina being very conservative Muslim in this, I was worried about that, but she accepts this person with so much love and understanding that it made me cry. There was that. Overall, this was just a really fun romp. This is kind of a getting the band back together for one last hurrah type of story, and it executed it extremely, extremely well. This does set up for a series, but this is a really great first installment, and I think it stands on its own really, really well. And again, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I want to gush about my favorite read of the month, and that is A Taste of Gold and Iron by Alexandra Rowland. Now, Alexander Rowland uses they them pronouns, and I just want to say that up front. And they have the opportunity here to be a new favorite author. I am itching to read more by this author. This is about our young Prince Cadeau, who kind of does a political oopsie at the beginning of the book and has to deal with the consequences of that by helping his Empress sister solve a crime for who is introducing counterfeit coins into their economy. We are also following Evermere, who is Cadeau's bodyguard, and you guessed it, this is a bodyguard ex-prince romance. And this is slow burn, this is tender, this is queer, and this is everything I'm looking for in a political fantasy romance. The plot, honestly, on this one is fun, but it's really about the characters for me in this work. Evermere and Cadeau had me swooning. And they're just flirting with each other for the first 300 pages. Like, it is slow burn, and it is a satisfying slow burn at that. Characters go from kind of bad first impressions to eventual confidants to eventual friends to lovers, and it is chef's kiss. This has also elements of like found family and family being really important to our main character Cadeau. And there was one scene in particular where a mother figure, she is not actually Cadeau's mother, but she is a mother figure to him, and she tells him how proud she is of him and everything he's doing, which had me crying. We love those types of tender moments. This book had me squealing and blushing and kicking my feet in adorableness. This is the type of romance that I don't know if I can articulate exactly why it works, but it has that special something to it. This has the sauce. This has the little extra spice that I'm looking for. Not necessarily smut. This does have a scene later, but it's not very explicit. But it has that extra level of something that makes this romance perfect for me. World building, the world that we're in, the magic system, the plot was all secondary to me. I enjoyed those elements, but it was all a prop to me to uplift this excellent romance. I still enjoyed all those things, but the standout for me was this romance. These two are my OTP. I love them so much, and I've gushed long enough. You get the idea. The last thing I will say about this work is that Cadeau suffers from anxiety, and I really appreciated how he tackled his anxiety throughout the story and his kind of journey with his mental health in this world. Obviously, it's a fantasy and they don't have the term anxiety, but I think the way the author handled it was with extreme care and tenderness and love. 5 out of 5 stars. This is the best thing I read this month. Those were all the books I read in March that I haven't talked about in a vlog recently. Thank you so much for watching. What did you read in March? I would love to know in the comments down below, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.